CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson. Presented by Garage Living Winnipeg.
What's going on, CFL fans? Labor Day is just about here, and it is on in the Canadian Football League. Welcome to CFL 110. Andrew Paterson, Jeff Hamilton with you on a packed edition of the program, heading into the most fun weekend of the Canadian Football League regular season. We've got a packed one for you today. Great to have you with us. If you are finding us on YouTube, make sure to go to your favorite podcast provider, search CFL 110, and give us a sub there as well. And if you are listening on the podcast, check us out on the Winnipeg Sports Talk YouTube channel with full video for each program. Thanks again for joining us. Tell a friend about CFL 110. And just before we dive into all the content today, a huge thanks to our presenting sponsor, Garage Living Winnipeg. Well, folks, you know, Labor Day is here, and that means fall is just around the corner. The push is on, and if you want to have a clean, organized, revolutionized garage this fall, before the snow flies, give Garage Living a call at 204-999-1234. It's been an amazing summer for the guys at Garage Living, transforming dozens of garages in and around the city. Now they're gearing up for a busy fall as the push is on to get clients booked, garages designed, and installations complete before winter. Don't miss your chance to clear the clutter, organize and beautify your garage with polyaspartic floor coating, made in Canada premium metal cabinetry, and slat wall storage solutions, along with options for lifts so you can work on that car or even your sled in the comfort, warmth, and beauty of your beautiful Garage Living Done garage. Check out their website and all of their amazing work at garageliving.com. And give our friend Pat Kanuga a call. He's loving his move from early morning radio guy to garage designer. You can get Pat at 204-999-1234 to book a free in-garage consultation or make an appointment to meet him in their showroom at 981 Main Street. CFL 110, presented by Garage Living Winnipeg. Garages made for living. All right, let's get to it. Hammer, what's going on? How are you?
Good, my man. What a weekend of games. What a week of news. Can't wait to dive into this. It's as you said, I'm getting excited for this weekend. I'll be heading out to Regina on Friday, enjoying what I think is my 7th or 8th Labor Day in a row. I got a good feeling about this one too, man. I think I said on the last show, felt like the last few years have kind of been a bit quiet since post-COVID. I just get this feeling, this vibe that there's going to be a resurgence of blue and gold, which always makes the weekend that much more special. So looking forward to it for sure.
Listen,
but we got a busy week here.
There's nothing like Labor Day weekend in Regina. We'll be there as well. I know there'll be, I'm not sure if there'll be a ton of blue in the stadium. I've already seen that there is not a single ticket available at Mosaic Stadium on the weekend.
Finally.
But I'm with you. I think this is going to be back to among the best when you think about where these teams are and the scenario in the Western Division, which we'll get to a little later on. But let's start off right out of the gate with some breaking news. Shawn Lemon will not be coming back to the Canadian Football League. The league's upheld his suspension. Give us the latest on this, Hammer.
Yeah, so kind of the final chapter, if you will. It's for a saga that's really been happening since April. I mean, just to go through a bit of the timeline here, Shawn Lemon was suspended indefinitely in April of this year, ahead of the 2024 season for gambling on games as a member of the Calgary Stampeders back in 2021. Now, the gambling was, all things considered, minimal in the sense that it was about one bet. It was the money was less than $100, including the payout. He didn't win, and it involved 2 games, including one of his own. For those curious or that don't know, yes, he bet on the Calgary Stampeders to win, so he did bet on his team to lose, which would add a significant wrinkle into this. However, gambling is a cardinal sin. You can't do it in any sports league. It speaks to the integrity of a league, and especially when you factor in gambling and how important that's become to sports leagues and generating revenue. There just is no room for this. And again, I mentioned that saga. So he was suspended in April. he knew that the CFL was digging into this. He felt that he could kind of get out of it, so he announced his retirement before they even announced his indefinite suspension. And after they announced his suspension, well, he had a change of heart and said, well, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to come back. And he appealed the suspension. He had a couple different appeal dates earlier this year. Got to play 4 games. The second appeal in which upheld the suspension. Then he was going to another arbitration, which is this result. This is the ultimate binding decision, which has ultimately upheld Lemon's suspension. And at 38 years old, this marks the end of Lemon's career. I don't see him being welcomed back anytime soon, which is obviously a tough ending for a guy who would get strong consideration for Hall of Fame. Nomination here, so we'll see how that affects him. But play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The fact that you would even bet on a game, despite Lemon's argument being that he wasn't officially told about gambling and whether or not you were allowed to have it, because it was only in 2023 with the emergence of these higher gambling representation in the CFL that they got this formal sit down. Well, it's always been in the rule book, and so that one kind of fell through the cracks, and here we are. It's a tough ending for Shawn Lemon, but not a surprising one.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it is a topic, and I do feel a little bit for Shawn. I mean, this was small potatoes in the in the scope of of gambling and issues like the National Football League has had and many other leagues. But it does come down to, and listen, it'll be a controversial topic because we've talked about many other policies as to how they affect players' ability to continue to make a living in the Canadian Football League. But if you sit down with any commissioner, the integrity of the game is the one thing that you absolutely have to maintain. And if there's any question about it being at all affected by players gambling on CFL games, you need to have the hardest of hard policies, which the Canadian Football League, as do most leagues, have. It's funny. We never really got the full story about the Shane Pinto suspension in Ottawa, if you recall, and he got suspended for half of the season. And it almost seemed like that, with being so early in the gambling era for the National Hockey League, was sort of the warning shot to everybody else in the league. Mm-hmm. We're a little bit further down the road here with football and with the Canadian Football League. And, Shawn Lemon, while certainly nowhere close to in violation of to the degree that we've seen in other cases,
totally
committed the crime. And, unfortunately, and it is the end of a very, very, one of the great careers of linemen in the past 20 years, Jeff.
Yeah. And, if there's a silver lining, Huss, he went out with a Grey Cup championship last season, and the interesting part about that is Shawn Lemon was a free agent for a while. The Winnipeg, he wanted to be a member of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He was advocating for himself. He was calling teams saying, I'm ready to go. And it was interesting because there was something with him. All you hear about is a good teammate, good leader, yet he couldn't crack a roster anywhere. Like nobody seemed to want him. And then, the Montreal Alouettes threw him a life raft, if you will, same as Darnell Sankey, brought those two guys in, and they were key contributors to the defense, arguably two of their best contributors on defense in their Grey Cup run. And so, that is a tough pill to swallow. Yes, when you compare it to some other gambling integrity issues across different leagues, it is on the lower end, but there is no excuse. There's no excuse, and the punishment needs to be strong. And I think he made a good point there. And I know I created some buzz on Twitter this morning because, it's interesting to look at various policies, and that, the CFL had to make an example of Shawn Lemon in this case. He had to tell the rest of the league that, your career is over. If you even, if you even bet as little as he bet, as few games as he bet, your career is done. And it's hard not to look at Chad Kelly in this situation. And I think Randy Ambrosie, which, let's be clear about something, Randy Ambrosie does not hesitate to bring up his wife and his daughters and almost every serious question you have for him. It's like he almost tries to disarm you about how much love he has for the female members of his family. Well, I think he sent a clear message today saying that you can harass a female team employee, and while we're going to take it serious, it doesn't affect the integrity of the league. Like, the integrity of the league like gambling does. And that just, I don't know. I know there's,
Well, I hate to say it, and I don't want to get on this island here, but it's true. It doesn't. I mean, all of that stuff is off-field stuff, which certainly affects, it affects people, and it affects, how, once it becomes public or guys get charged with things, it certainly affects how people feel about maybe the teams or how they're run. But the actual integrity of the game, which is the product, can be irreparably harmed by gambling, and that is why it is the one strike and you're out policy, not just in the Canadian Football League, but in everywhere. And listen, I mean, I've got a lot of time for discussing other policies, penalties for that, and I think they should. We reevaluate them. Are they working? Do we need to do more? Are they too stringent? I mean, for sure, do all that. That's good management. This is one that there'll be no conversations for. You're in the CFL, you can't bet on the CFL, and you sure as hell can't bet on your own games. And that's sort of where we go from there. Hammer, listen, it's a crazy how much talk the Rouge took over. And it wasn't just here in Canada. After the epic walk-off Rouge between the Argos and Riders, it seems like we get a conversation like this sort of once or twice a year. I have to admit, I was a little surprised at how much talk there was about it this time, because again, this rule's over 100 years old, but there sure was a lot of it. Where are you on the latest on the single point and the fact that games can be won or lost on a single late in the football game?
The Rouge heard round the world, Huss. It was, you know what? I've been obviously thinking about it. I've seen the debates. I've listened to a few on some other podcasts, and as they chop it up. And I'll be honest, I felt like that was a wah end to an otherwise tight game. I felt like in that instance, like it's just. I just go to the point where what if this happens in a Grey Cup, as much as I love the unique rules of the CFL, and I understand the arguments of, and kind of the science, if you will, behind the Rouge. I thought it was a great chat with Derek Taylor and Bombers head coach Mike O'Shea, who knows the rules better than anybody in this league, talking, giving his opinion on. Obviously, as a massive traditionalist, he doesn't want to see the Rouge go anywhere. But what I thought was interesting in his argument was just the thinking about Rouge. You were constantly thinking about Rouges all game, right? Field position. You're thinking about whether you should give it up, whether you should run it out of the end zone. Maybe you're down by three points and you don't want to make it a 4 point. So it's a factor throughout the entire game. So to have it then be a factor at the end of the game makes sense to me. I go back to this just rewarding failure. And again, you can make the argument that, well, they got in the field position, so that isn't rewarding failure and whatnot. So
here's the thing. How about this? How about he didn't fail? All they needed was a single point and they got it.
And I think that argument is sound. I don't mind that argument. The thing, and to be honest with you, if I had to vote right now, Huss, I would say keep it. I don't think we should go in and changing the rules and whatever. And, it hasn't affected that many games that we know of. And if it does, so what? That's part of the rule book. But it's trying to grow the game, Huss. It's trying to, and while I think there's a lot of rules in the Canadian Football League that would be appealing and enticing even to different markets, including and specifically the U.S., I think there's a lot of people who look at that in the United States and will write the league off because of it. I think there's enough people that won't go, wow, that's a unique situation. Though I think there's still people down there who are still trying to figure out what happened despite reading tons of articles. I think they still don't quite get it. And so, and again, like, I'm not saying we should be bending our rules for Americans in this case, but it's important that the CFL grows. It's important that they do grow there. And I think that's negative attention. In this case, not all good attention is positive. What about you, man? What do you think about it?
Well, I would love to sit here and go head to head and start up a fiery debate, but I to be honest, I'm with you. And I really wish we had the clip, and I'll plug it, the CJOB Coaches Show from Monday night with Derek Taylor and Mike O'Shea. And O'Shea had by far the best description of what goes in from a head coach's standpoint as to why the Rouge is always on your mind. And he made the argument that the CFL is a field position game. And this goes back to the origins of Canadian Football League rules and its roots. And you're thinking about field position and that Rouge at all moments. And listen, you can be angry with the way that it ended and the fact that the Argos just had to get it through the end zone. But you look back at how they got to that point. A terrible penalty at a terrible time by the Saskatchewan Roughriders on a punt return that had them start deep in their zone. A sack on first down that left them on their 1 yard line. That's why they were in that situation in the first place. And listen, we'll get to Corey Mace's time management in a minute, which is another topic entirely. The one thing that I will say, and listen, first things first, I love Rod Smith. I think TSN does an amazing job of the game. The one thing that I thought was missing in that case was them clearly setting the case and the scenario, even before that final play when the Argos got this back, that the Riders have a 2nd and 17 on their 1. If they don't get a first down, they are going to be kicking this football, and Toronto is going to have the opportunity to win this game on a Rouge. It was very clear that in BMO, there was maybe 20 or 25% of the fans that really even grasped exactly what the scenario was. And listen, that's tough to do for the fans in the stands. But for the fans that are watching on television, particularly new fans, I think it's important to give them the entire story about what's going on and let them know about a quirky rule that is part of Canadian football. And I think that was missing a little bit, why it did catch some people off guard. But at the end of the day, the Rouge is part of the CFL. I think if people understand it and know how impactful those other plays were that put Saskatchewan in danger of losing the game in the fashion that they did, they would have been better served. But
Huss, I got one more comment about the Rouge, and I was thinking about it this weekend after that game. I thought Edmonton's best bet in tying Montreal was to take the field goal with time left and then try to tie the game on a Rouge. That's I know that they got deeper down. I know they had shots at the end zone. I'm talking about the series before that. I just thought for time management. So even I was thinking about using the Rouge in the game. So it's like, how can I say get rid of it because it happened to decide one of the games? And so I like the idea that a team can be down by a point with the game on the line and they can force overtime. It keeps teams in it. Whereas in the NFL, you have to kick a 3-pointer, right? So you get a guy like Boris Beatty, who's been nothing but horrendous this year. He's got a massive boot. He could probably get it from 75 yards out, possibly. Maybe not that far, but maybe at least, on his side of the field. So I've wavered back and forth, but now as we talk about it, I'm more convinced than ever that keep the Rouge in.
Listen, I'm with you. Do you want a game ending on a walk-off Rouge in the playoffs or a Grey Cup? No, but I'll tell you what, if you have a team that's down by 1 point, you might, to use your point, you might have a team that is able to tie the game up and bring it to overtime on a Rouge. Listen, it's just part of the Canadian Football League history. It's part of the rules. I do think it's important, maybe from a broadcast perspective, to educate the fans that might be new, that might not understand about the intricacies of the scoring, and let them know about the situation a little bit better that happened last week, and maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. The team that lost that game is the Saskatchewan Roughriders. We're going to get to the Bombers and the West in this Labor Day matchup in a minute, but listen, they're still first place, which any Rider fan would have taken at the start of the year. But this team hasn't won in over a month, 0-4-1 in their last 5. And maybe a little bit of the shine coming off Corey Mace, in particular, a ton of conversation about how he handled the clock late in that game that they lost by 1 in Toronto.
Oh, a ton of shine. I wouldn't even say there's shine. I would say there's panic right now happening in Saskatchewan. And I'll remind you, I believe did they not go, is it not the game after Labor Day where there's 7 games left that they went 0 for? Have they not won? Have they not lost every game after the Labor Day Classic in the last 2 seasons? So to get the losing starting before that, that's a sensitive time of the year now for Rough Riders fans. So I get the panic, and this has to be the most miserable team in first place. And, to your point, Corey Mace, and look, I got a ton of respect for Corey Mace. I think he's going to be a great coach in this league for a long time. I think he's a leader of men. He is the exact blueprint that you want in today's CFL coaching. But I think there was a bit of a Corey Mace effect at the beginning. A lot of guys were feeling well, and that's kind of fallen off here. And the thing is while you got to demand perfection, I mean, at least execution from your team, you can't be costing your team games either. And that's ultimately coaching has been an issue here. I mean, post game, Corey Mace didn't seem to understand time management, clock management. There was enough time there. Had he not tried to convert that second down after calling a timeout after he already did, so erase that. I don't even mind that part. It was the next decision to try to convert it to MLS, and the pass got knocked down, leaving more than enough time for him to punt it back. Had he waited the 19 seconds out of 20 to hut the ball, boot it to the other team, and take the seconds it would have taken there, that would have been the end of the fourth quarter. So for him to not do that, and then for him to not acknowledge it at the end of the game or understand it, just seemed weird to me. And the game before that, it was conservative play calling on third down that cost him the game. So those are coaching errors. But I'm going to make the argument here that the Saskatchewan Roughriders are indeed pretenders. I think we were all kind of drinking the green juice early on in the year, particularly with this defense. Talk about the Corey Mace effect. Obviously, he did special things in Toronto on the defensive side of things before he took the job this year. But we made this argument before, Huss, and you look at them and they're losing close games. Okay, they're losing by their last in this 5-game stretch. The 4 losses, they've lost by an average of 4.75 points, which is obviously within a touchdown. So, but if you look at their first 6 games, they were beating teams. Now, the margin of victory was 11 points. So that's good. But they were beating Edmonton. Okay, so they started off with a 29-21 victory against Edmonton. Then they won against Hamilton. We all know how bad Hamilton is. Then they played Hamilton again, and they crushed Hamilton. Then they played Toronto, and they lost that game. They won that game. That game was in Toronto, it was in Regina. That's Mace's old team. Guys rallied for that. Guys want to get the coach the victory against their former team. Also missing their number 1 quarterback. They go in and they lose to the BC Lions in BC Place, the legitimate Lions at the time, the high-rolling Lions. So they're real tough competition. They lost by significant amount. 35-20, and then they beat Winnipeg 19-9, and that's the last victory of their season. And the Bombers' offense was horrendous. The Bombers' defense did enough to win that game. The Bombers' offense didn't come close. And so while the competition has gotten stiffer here, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Edmonton, Montreal, we're starting to see a team that's probably just more realistic to this year, a team that's going to make strides under Corey Mace, but isn't going to be this dominating outfit that we saw earlier in the year.
Yeah, listen, I'll buy a little bit of that in that I think they got off to a great start for a lot of reasons, but they did take advantage of the schedule and 2 teams that weren't very good and really struggling at the time. This is a very, very good defense, I still believe. I think that the narrative around this football team would be very different if Brett Lowther didn't have the disastrous game that he had. Because to be honest, that game, I'm sitting there watching what they did to an elite Montreal team, and they probably should have won that game by double digits.
Yeah.
You miss 4 field goals, 1 gets returned back for a touchdown, and all of a sudden you lose a game. I mean, Trevor Harris was the best quarterback in the CFL that week coming back from injury. We can't forget that he missed some games as well. So listen, are they the best team in the West? Are they right there with Montreal? I don't think so, although they sure looked it at home in that game. But I'm certainly not writing them off right now. And I'll tell you what, that win 2 weeks ago probably would have called the dogs off a little bit. If they can beat the Bombers on Sunday, no one's going to be talking about this. They'll be first place. They'll have the biggest win of the season in a rivalry game and be there. To me, it starts with their defense, but we have seen their offense play at a really high level. And listen, there's been a little bit of coaching. There's been some special teams issues that have cost them. But every team, the Bombers are a perfect example of that. They did that to themselves earlier this season as well. And that's what brings us to this weekend, this matchup in the final 8 games of the regular season being as fascinating as we've seen in the Western Division in a long, long time. Before we get to the Bombers and this matchup in the Labor Day games, let's quickly talk about BC, because while the Riders have had a rough last 5 games and haven't had any wins to show for it, they do have the tie. They had a game that they're really kicking themselves that they should have won. BC's in free fall right now, and they lose on the weekend to the Ottawa Redblacks. Nathan Rourke is now 0-2, and Vernon Adams is getting healthy. How do you see this playing out with Rourke? What's at stake for him this week in the Touchdown Pacific game? And might we see Vernon Adams back despite all the hoopla and fanfare of bringing back the prodigal son Nathan Rourke to the CFL?
Okay, well, let's start with the fact that Rick Campbell has confirmed that Nathan Rourke is starting this week in the game that's being played in Victoria. I think that's the right decision in that, first of all, Nathan Rourke was born in Victoria, and I don't think the people in that area were looking forward to seeing him on the sidelines holding a clipboard. Secondly, I just think 2 games is not a good enough sample size. You know, Nathan Rourke and what he did, I get it. It was in 2022, has bought himself a long enough leash for 2 games. And the BC Lions do not want to create this QB controversy, this turmoil in the locker room, because if you go to VA, you kind of got to stick with VA. You can't be jumping around every week to who your quarterback is. And if you have to make that decision again, it's just going to look, it's just going to create a little bit of tension here. Now, where I think this gets interesting, Huss, where we could see a real quarterback controversy, is how Nathan Rourke performs this weekend. And the reality is the BC Lions have lost 5 games in a row. They're up against a rematch here against the Ottawa Redblacks. Another team that's rolling under Bobby Dice and is finding, while there's tons of teams around the leagues that are finding ways to lose games, the Ottawa Redblacks are certainly in the opposite direction. They're finding ways to win. But make no mistake, this is Vernon Adams' team still. As we talked about last week, Huss, Nathan Rourke is a talented quarterback. I think he's going to be the quarterback of the future, and the BC Lions are ultimately lucky to have such a young and dynamic pivot. However, not many people in the locker room, not nobody. There are some players that were here in 2022, but not a lot of players on that offense are still around. No Nathan Rourke personally have a commitment, an allegiance to Nathan Rourke that exists with Vernon Adams. And so if Nathan Rourke continues to struggle, and here's the other part, he has gotten better from week to week. He hasn't been great by any stretch of the imagination, but he's gotten better from week to week. Including, I know he didn't throw a touchdown, so I don't think he has a touchdown yet this year, but he did. David Mackey, the fullback, did not, punched in two touchdowns from the 1 yard line on both those drives. Particularly one was all passing plays by Rourke. The other one was mostly passing plays by Rourke. So there are signs that he's getting better. And if this guy can click, like we know he can click, the BC Lions will become a very, very dangerous team. But if Nathan Rourke can't return to Nathan Rourke, the tension is going to start to build. Vernon Adams is being a good soldier. He's playing the role of cheerleader right now. He's also playing the role of moderator in that locker room. There have been guys that have gone up to him, that have shared their feelings, that feel a certain way about him and about the situation and how they feel that he's being treated. But Vernon Adams' reply for now is, feel how you feel, but get over it quickly. We have a Grey Cup to win. 2024 is our year. How much is that vibe, that positivity going to exist if the wins rack up here? Look, I think the BC Lions are an incredibly talented team. I don't know that they're an incredibly mentally strong team. There's a lot of big personalities on that team. I've said this for years. They're a flashy, fun group to watch, but I wonder if they are as stable in that mental part of the game as a cohesive unit, because it would rock any team. Even the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a team that has been the model of stability when it comes to culture for years, had started to see some cracks through the first month of the season as they went 0-4. To have the BC Lions do a nosedive the way that they have over the last month and a bit here, if that continues, I think there's potential for this to go real sideways, and it's on head coach Rick Campbell, who has dealt with a similar situation. It's not the exact situation, but a similar one in 2016 with Trevor Harris and Henry Burris. They went on to win the Grey Cup that year. Dealt with those two marquee quarterbacks. He's going to have to be very careful in delivering his message to the rest of the locker room so he doesn't create that unrest or that, that tension in the locker room that can take apart any team and grow with each loss.
I mean, when looking at what's happened to BC right now, I mean, listen, I think they're still in a pretty enviable position. They're half a game out of first place, and they've got two of the best quarterbacks in the CFL. They've got an incredibly talented offense. It has taken a little bit for Nathan Rourke to click with all these new receivers, which I think will come. But I really do think that this game in Victoria on the weekend is going to determine whether he's starting or Vernon Adams is back as the starting quarterback the following week. That's certainly the way I would play it. And listen, it's CFL. We know and Nathan Rourke's a unique star in this league as well, being a Canadian guy and what he did before he went down to the National Football League. And the attention will always be on the quarterbacks. But BC could mix in a stop once in a while. I mean, their defense has been, it has not been anywhere close to a championship or maybe even a playoff caliber unit over the course of this losing streak right now. So do the quarterbacks have to be better? Absolutely. I'm pretty sure they're going to get that. I think if you really dive into the struggles of the British Columbia Lions right now, it's a hell of a lot more than the offense. Even thinking about being shut out by the Bombers in those ugly 2 games. I mean, outside of that, where Winnipeg's defense was playing at a level that I don't think anyone could have imagined, they have been getting points, but they haven't been stopping anybody. And you're not winning a Grey Cup giving up 30-plus points a game. And man, I mean,
Preach.
Just a quick tip of the cap to Drew Brown and the Ottawa Redblacks and what they were able to do last week. And it's funny as we transition into the Montreal situation, there's another quote-unquote QB problem in Montreal. You've got Cody Fajardo, who I think right now has to be the leader, even with the time he's missed, for the most outstanding player, considering no one else has really stepped up and delivered.
Sounds like his 2019 season. It's exactly what led him to the West finalists.
No doubt. But listen, Davis Alexander has been phenomenal with Fajardo out. All he's done is go out, throw touchdowns, take care of the football, move his team, and win football games. And, you wonder what the future holds for Alexander. And I ask you, referencing the Ottawa Redblacks, is Davis Alexander the Drew Brown of the 2024 CFL season?
So funny you bring that up, because I was thinking about the two, and they're not the same, because Drew Brown, just was in the league longer. But you can make the argument that the sample size is dangerously close, because Drew Brown didn't get a ton of opportunity throughout the years. He just made the most of every opportunity that he got, including that game. I love reminding people of it, that he was down 3 touchdowns against Edmonton and rolled back. I mean, that kind of put him on the map, was his consistency. And you want to see that consistency week to week. You can make the argument that coming in and playing 1 or 2 games a season, not consecutively, is an impressive feat to do what Drew Brown did over the time. But I think it's even more impressive to see a guy do it week after week after week as more and more tape gets put on him. And, we mentioned quarterback controversy. This is an incredibly great problem for the Montreal Alouettes to have. The problem for them will be at the end of this season when they try to figure out who's going to be the future. And I think, the irony in it, Huss, is that if the Montreal Alouettes win the Grey Cup again, and Cody Fajardo is their quarterback, they're probably not moving on from him. I think the loyalty aspect, much like we have attached to Mike O'Shea here in Winnipeg, I think you have to attach to Jason Moss. He's a very, very loyal head coach. And, I think what he really appreciates about Cody is his fearlessness. And so he's not going to punish him for an injury and bring him back. I thought what was interesting in this last game, Huss, was that they got the job done, but I felt like, did you not think that maybe Jason Moss was looking over at Davis Alexander as the Alouettes offense was sputtering for a majority of the first half? But there was that trust again from Jason Moss, who put his trust in Cody Fajardo, and Cody Fajardo finally knocked off the rust in the second half and led the team to victory. They shut out the Edmonton Elks in the second half. But Davis Alexander, there is a massive argument, and it's very similar to the one in Winnipeg, and that Winnipeg went with Zach Collaros. They gave away Drew Brown. They knew he was a talented guy. They still feel that there's gas in the tank for Zach Collaros. What is going to be the question for Cody Fajardo? Cody Fajardo is playing better than Zach Collaros, but he is not a better quarterback than Zach Collaros. We just, it's a long sample size. Now, he's younger than Zach. He's about 3 or 4 years younger. So he probably has some, maybe has a couple good seasons in him. But you really have to think about this because you look at Cody Fajardo, he's 32 years old, which isn't old for a quarterback. You probably have two more years left in him at least, maybe, because you also have to factor in that Cody Fajardo has been bitten by the injury bug throughout his career, including missing 4 games with a hamstring this season. Is he going to be a reliable quarterback when it comes to injuries? Whereas Davis Alexander is 25 years old and has brought, an energy to that offense. You see the receivers, man. They love Davis Alexander. They love what he's able to do. He's a lot more mobile. He hasn't run a ton. He's only run 11 times, but he's averaging 8.1 yards per run. He is that guy that Zach Collaros was. It's weird even comparing them, but he'll extend plays. He never gives up on a play, and yet he's still a smart quarterback. And even when you look at the statistics, they're pretty comparable. Cody has played about twice as many games, has 1,900 passing yards. Obviously, Alexander's started 4 games. He's just under 1,000 passing yards. Alexander's got 6 touchdowns compared to 1 interception, whereas Cody has 12 touchdowns compared to 5 interceptions. And then you have a QB rating that's 117 for Alexander and 111 for Cody Fajardo. So those are very comparable numbers when you look at the stats. Now, so that's going to be a tough decision. I say that they're probably going to go with Cody, but you have to think that if you have a 25-year-old guy who is rising, not only do you have to factor in that you might have to give him away, you got to play against him down the road. And so, it's a good problem to have, and it's certainly a backup plan. There's a lot of season left, and that's the beauty of all of this. All the narrative we've kind of put on every team, me calling the Riders pretenders, this QB situation. There's still a ton of season left to play out. Who knows? Maybe Cody Fajardo gets hurt again and Davis Alexander is leading them through the playoffs. Or maybe Cody regains that MOP pace and it's impossible to let him go. So there's still so much to happen here, but it's a good problem to have 2 great QBs in your state.
Well, for sure. And listen, I mean, have I been impressed with Davis Alexander? Absolutely. Am I even giving a thought to them going with Alexander over Cody? Definitely not. I've joked.
You're not.
Yeah. Well, no. And I mean, I don't listen. He's had 4 nice games. Cody Fajardo won the Grey Cup in incredible fashion last year and has led this team as a true leader of the team 100%. Right out of the gate to a 10-1 record. And Davis has a big part of that. I think we definitely need to see more. I mean, let's not forget that coming out of camp, he was the 3rd string quarterback for Montreal. So there had to be a reason for that, or maybe just give him a little bit more experience. Listen, he has increased his stock tenfold in his opportunities so far this year. If we see him back at some point this season due to injury or whatever, he'll have more opportunities to put up some tape. Listen, if Montreal is the class of the league right now, if they win a 2nd consecutive Grey Cup, unless Cody Fajardo decides to retire and walk off into the sunset a la John Elway or Peyton Manning after winning a championship, he'll be the guy next year. And the Montreal Alouettes will have a decision to make whether they keep him as a number 2 to work along with Cody and eventually take over, or, maybe move on the way
Won't have that option. His contract status is up at the end of the year. So unless Davis Alexander wants to be a backup quarterback, he won't be.
Exactly. And I mean, I guess the big question is, will another CFL team look at what he's done this year,
someone else's
much
gift,
like Drew Brown did, and give him the opportunity to come in and be a starting quarterback? We talked about BC a minute ago, and it was huge news when Nathan Rourke came back. Former BC Lion Matthew Betts, who was a sack machine last year, just released from the NFL in the final cuts as they went down to their 53-man rosters. I'd imagine that his phone's ringing off the hook by a number of teams, including a team right here in Winnipeg that doesn't quite have the, well, certainly don't have the sack numbers that they've had in the past, losing Jackson Jeffcoat and others. What do you make of the Betts situation? Do you expect him to come back? Are you hearing anything? And might it be somewhere else than BC? I do wonder about BC on the surface. Even if he wanted to come back, they just cut a pretty big check to Nathan Rourke. I'm not sure what their situation is, even being able to bring back Betts if he wanted to go back to BC first and foremost.
Yeah, so just on the Betts in the NFL situation, he's 29 years old, right? I mean, this is kind of his last chance. Now, will he take the year as his last chance? Because as we talk here, there's still a process to continue here. He's got to clear waivers. There's potential for him to be assigned to a practice roster. There's potential for it, for him to take maybe a month or two and try to join another roster as the league starts up here in a bit and injuries happen. So maybe there's a potential for that. But certainly anybody who's interested in getting pressure on the quarterback, and I think you can count all 9 teams in the league who want to do that. Getting a guy like Matthew Betts would be a massive pickup. I made a tweet here. Obviously, I'm in Winnipeg. I cover the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I think it would be an absolute significant move by Winnipeg, who is currently tied with the Calgary Stampeders for the fewest sacks in the CFL. I get it. They have an awesome defense right now, but how much better would this group be if they had the pressure that Matthew Betts could bring? But, as you mentioned, is BC an option? He did have that breakout season in BC. I know he enjoyed his time there. Is he as committed to the BC Lions as a Nathan Rourke was? Would he be, would he give them first right to refusal? And, it's interesting too, Huss, a lot of it, people go, well, how do they put him under the salary cap? They just signed Nathan Rourke. They got Vernon Adams at, whatever, $500,000 or whatever it is with playing time. And, how do they fit a guy like Matthew Betts, who's going to demand big money and whatnot for the last half of the season? I still, to this point, man, do not believe there is a ceiling on marketing money. So if you wanted to pay him $50,000 and give him $200,000 in marketing money, now you have to document it. He has to do stuff outside of playing the field. So that money needs to be accounted for. But I believe that is very much in the realm of possibility. So I don't believe dollars and cents, unless you're a cash-strapped owner or a fiscally responsible owner who doesn't like overspending his money. I think anyone could get Matthew Betts, which I think the scariest part, Huss, is we bring up BC. Obviously, I mentioned Winnipeg. What about going home to Montreal?
I was just about to say, they just lost Shawn Lemon.
What about going home to Montreal? Would that not be just the most disgusting move in the CFL this year? Adding to a defense where, I get it, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have been getting a lot of the spotlight for their defensive performances, but it's been the Montreal defense who has been the most consistent all season long and the hardest to penetrate. So would picking up a guy like Matthew Betts, which I'm sure would love the idea of going home, if you will, speaking French in the locker room, all that good stuff that's been galvanized through Jason Moss since he took over last year. That would be a scary situation for the rest of the teams in this league.
There's no doubt about it. And listen, like most of these athletes, their career, their earning potential is limited. It is short. I have a feeling, assuming that he's planning and wants to come back to the Canadian Football League this season, he'll follow the money and I think go to whoever cashes the check. But having a chance to win, having a chance to get that Grey Cup bonus is going to play into it. Montreal, although like we saw with Toronto last year, you can look like a lock to be in the Grey Cup midway through the season. It doesn't always work out that way. But I think that is the smart money. And, what as we mentioned, with Shawn Lemon not coming back, he is a player that, was playing, had a great spot on their roster. Betts would roll in and take that to another level. And to your point, that would be very scary for the rest of the Canadian Football League. On the other side of the line, legendary CFL offensive lineman Stanley Bryant went down early in the game on Friday night here in Winnipeg. And, Jeff, I know you were in the press box. I was in the stands. It was as long of an injury timeout I can remember, and it was as eerie and concerning for someone that just simply never comes off the field to be down in the fashion that he was. And, I mean, listen, I'll be honest, there was a lot of concern that maybe this was far more than a normal football injury, potentially a heart attack or something like that. We found out later that, he was sick beforehand. It was hard to expect a heat exhaustion because it was 5 plays into the game, but the way it's rolled out for Stanley in particular and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers is certainly best case scenario. And stunningly, it sounds like he's going to be once again out there protecting Zach Collaros in the Labor Day Classic. I mean, for maybe folks that missed it, give us a quick idea of what Stanley went through and what we've learned about a scary event on Friday night at Princess Auto Stadium.
Yeah, I'm, in my seat, I had mentioned to you on your show on Monday how, I kind of not downplayed it, but just, felt it was heat exhaustion, even though it was early, it was hot, a humid night at Princess Auto Stadium. So, but there was certainly, my interviews afterwards and the information I found out once the game was all said and done. I mean, there were players that were crying, that had never, and personnel who, team staff, everyone who is, the thing about Stanley Bryant is one of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet. He might be the nicest human being in the Canadian Football League, and while he is certainly headed to the Hall of Fame and has done a ton of things on the field that have earned the respect from not just his teammates but the entire league, it's also who he is off the field that has made him revered across the CFL and appreciated by everybody. So it was a scary moment, certainly, and that just that confusion, just that not knowing, never seen something like that, as players explained to me after the game, was just very tough to handle, and the game became second fiddle after that. Really, I mean, they wanted to honor Stanley for sure, but they had a busy mind. As for Stanley himself, he was at the hospital. He called the team, let them know that he was okay. I think just after halftime, even let them know he was listening to the game on the radio and would have taken in that game-winning drive. But he's dealing with an infection. We don't know the details of the infection, but add on the illness with the heat exhaustion, and it was just the perfect storm for him not to be able to stand on his own 2 feet. And while it sounds kind of wild in the sense that, this guy's being stretchered off the field, covered in, having an IV in his arm, covered in cold, towels, all of a sudden is going to be ready to go this season. It is one of those things that once you get over the infection, which is pretty routine from what I understand, then it's like back to normal. You get over sickness, and then you get to, you got to get back up to game speed. And with the game not being played till Sunday, the Bombers certainly have that longer week to get him. So while it can seem a little bit surprising that he's back, it's not when you consider everything being, best case scenario when you saw what went down that day.
Well, and listen, just on Stanley, his signing in Winnipeg is up there with Andrew Harris's signing as the most impactful free agent signings, not just Bomber history, Canadian Football League history. When you look at what he's done since he's come here from Calgary, all the most outstanding lineman awards. But he's basically, in a lot of ways, a pillar of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And that's why I think you'd be concerned if anybody went down in the fashion that they did at Princess Auto Stadium on Friday night. But it was even a little bit more jarring just because Stanley Bryant is always out there protecting Zach Collaros.
Never misses games.
9 straight years. 9 years. The only time he's been out is when they've clinched a bye and they decided to give him a night off. So I'll be honest. If it was anybody else, I would maybe be surprised that they'd be there on Sunday in Mosaic. I'm not surprised with Stanley Bryant, and obviously everyone just happy from coast to coast that he is well and we'll see him back on the field. To the Bombers and the West overall. So the Bombers have won 3 in a row. They grabbed one out of the fire on Friday night, and I will tell you this: if the final drive didn't go the way that it did for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, the conversations on Winnipeg Sports Talk, on CFL 110, and in pubs, coffee shops, and everywhere around Manitoba would be very different this week, because this was one of Zach Collaros' roughest games as a Winnipeg Blue Bomber. And yet, with the game on the line in the final minute, Zach stepped up and does what he's done throughout his time here in Winnipeg, and that is find a way to win. And it brings us to Labor Day weekend, Jeff, in a scenario which truly was preposterous even 3 weeks ago. The Bombers can come back from Mosaic Stadium on Monday from Regina in first place in the West, despite starting 0-4 and 2-6. And again, this is the Labor Day game. Just a quick thought on the Bombers moving out of that close call against the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the landscape of the West, which is as wide open as any point I can remember in forever.
You often hear this, it's a game of inches, and it seriously is. And as I've said so many times on this show, on your show, on other shows, if you don't like the narrative, you dictate the narrative. You're right. If the Bombers don't march 11 plays and 72 yards with $1:28 left on the clock and score with 19 seconds remaining to go up and ultimately win that game, we're talking about how badly Zach Collaros played, how much in trouble this team is, and they're heading into Regina, and they're going to have a really tough go this weekend, which remains true. I do give the edge to the Riders this weekend, just with the Bombers getting beaten up on the O-line. I mean, great news that Stanley Bryant is back, but they're still out Patrick Neufeld. Gabe Wallace went down with a knee injury. He's not going to be back for a couple weeks, so they are a banged up group there, but. I mean, the Bombers are, it's like you said, a month ago, the idea of hosting a playoff game seemed like a pipe dream. Now, the way things are going, it almost looks like a foregone conclusion that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are going to win the West or have a great opportunity to win the West here. They're finding their groove, arguably at the right time, while the rest of the teams in the West seem to be finding unique ways to lose games. So, the Bombers, I thought, Zach Collaros, had a horrible game, had 3 interceptions. That third pick came late in the fourth quarter. It led to a lot of people leaving their seats and leaving the game. But he did what he does best. With the game's on the line, when the pressure is at its highest, he marched that team down the field with the help of Brady Oliveira, and they got into the end zone. And that's a scary, scary thing for the rest of the team, because the Bombers are now finding ways to win. Not coming up with different ways to lose as the rest of the league. And, there's still a lot of catching up that this offense needs to do with the defense. There's no doubt about that. This team can still demand more from their attack, from Zach Collaros, from everybody on that offense. But if they start answering the bell and they do start catching up to the defense, we're going to start to see or feel a lot of the same things that we've been feeling about the Blue and Gold in previous years, that, they are the team to beat. I still don't think, they're not, it's interesting too, Huss, right? We're talking about the West here. The East has 3 teams that are better than the best team in the West. So it's not like there isn't competition waiting for them on the other side. The Bombers are actually actually have a luxury now playing in the West Division, battling against these teams.
Complete bizarro world looking at the standings. I mean, it was Marshall Ferguson, I think it was on with me earlier. He said, if you just looked at the standings and covered up the teams and saw 3 teams above 500 with the 10-1 team, and then all these other teams at 500 or worse, you would say, well, that's the West, that's the East. Like, that's just the way that it is in the Canadian Football League. Not this year. The Alouettes are the class of the league. Ottawa continuing to slowly earn respect, winning 7 so far in the year. Toronto getting to 6-4 in a very close game against Saskatchewan. And then, as we've mentioned, Saskatchewan is in first right now, despite not winning for a month, at 0-4-1. It sets up a fascinating Labor Day slate with all 5 Western teams in action. Nathan Rourke is going to get the start in Touchdown Pacific, hosting Ottawa. Just heading over to Coolbet and checking out these lines. BC's 3-point favorites against Ottawa in that game. The Riders 2.5-point favorites in the Labor Day Classic against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Argos laying 5 in the donut box against the Ticats in the first of 2 Labor Day games. And then I'm a little surprised with this, that Calgary is a 3-point favorite against Edmonton. I thought this would be a lot closer, but it's another week, Jeff, where we look at the point spreads and every game is within, well, with the exception of the Toronto-Hamilton game, within the 3 points that books usually give for home field advantage. I honestly can say there's never been parity like this, with all due respect to Montreal, who's clearly established themselves as the team to beat in the Canadian Football League. And it sets up what is going to be an unbelievable weekend with 4 games that all have massive implications on the standings and the final stretch here heading through to the CFL playoffs.
Whereas in some previous weeks, Huss, we've been able to kind of pinpoint one game, particularly maybe 2 games per weekend, as like, the games of the week, if you will. This one is just jam-packed. The storylines heading to this one are wild. I mean, obviously you have the battle for the top spot in the West against the Bombers and the Riders. That's must-watch TV. For my money, and I get it, I got a little bit of geographical bias. I think it's the best rivalry in the CFL. It's the two biggest markets as far as, fan base and give a shit meter, if you will. But look at the other games, man. I mean, how rough of a ride is Chad Kelly going to have in the Hammer this weekend? I mean, those, the research that those fans must be doing,
yes.
I get anxiety just thinking about it. So that's going to be,
this is the Ticats Grey Cup.
This is the Ticats Grey Cup
exactly. On the weekend. There's
if they win
no
any
doubt.
game, it's this weekend. And I think fans won't be happy, but they'll be happier than they are now. And then you look at BC, obviously, they're up against a good Ottawa team. They got to right this ship. If they don't get done in this touchdown Pacific game, if they lose out there, that's just going to add to their woes here. And then, of course, the Battle of Alberta. I mean, that's going to be a nasty one. We still, it's a little less it's a little less on the standings wise. We don't really know who Calgary is. Edmonton, took a shot took a shot back with losing against Montreal, but overall, it's still going to be an intense rivalry and a very close game. Again, this is kind of, I don't want to call it the Grey Cup for either one of these teams. I both think that they can make a splash here down the stretch, but it's certainly going to be a hotly contested game, and all weekend is just going to be a fun 3-down adventure, man.
Well, listen, I mean, I can't wait to get out to Regina on the weekend. We'll see you there. Many fans in both blue and green. It should be, and again, there's nothing more fun than that weekend in Regina. But I will say, I don't think there's any question that Bombers and Riders is the rivalry in the Canadian Football League. And there's one measure, I can tell you, there's not a single ticket available for the Labor Day Classic at Mosaic, and there's not a single ticket available for the rematch of the Banjo Bowl the following week in Winnipeg. So the bar is set pretty high for the rest of the CFL. Hammer, great stuff. Safe travels, and we'll see you in Regina. Huge thanks to our friends and our presenting sponsors, Garage Living Winnipeg. If you'd like more information on what is possible to revolutionize your garage in time for winter, go to garageliving.com, check out their incredible work, and give our pal Pat Kanuga a call, 204-999-1234 for a free in-garage consultation. Folks, have a great Labor Day long weekend wherever you are, and enjoy what should be an unbelievable week in the Canadian Football League. We'll see you next week on CFL 110 as we get ready for the follow-up and, of course, the rematch of the Banjo Bowl and the Labor Day Classic out in Alberta. For Jeff Hamilton, I'm Andrew Paterson. Have a great one. We'll see you next week on CFL 110.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.